There is a city in old Greece that the gods seemed to build for the sole purpose of watching it suffer. Every king who sat on its throne inherited the same quiet promise that the walls would rise and the blood would fall, and no one would ever be allowed to know why until it was far too late. Hey friends, welcome back. Tonight we step into the doomed life of Thebes, from a wandering prince chasing a runaway cow across half the world, to a dragon's teeth that grew into an army of murderers overnight, to a king who solved the greatest riddle ever asked and never once guessed he was the answer. Before we sink in, one small thing. If these nights help you, a like and a subscribe mean a lot. No pressure. Only if it feels earned. And drop a comment. Which city are you in tonight? And what time is it there? I read every one. It's my favorite part of this. Alright. Lights low. Fan on. If you like that soft hum. Get heavy. Get comfortable. Tonight's story starts now. The sea moved black and slow beneath a boat that had been searching for something it could never find. Salt hung in the air, thick enough to taste on your lips, and the wind carried the far-off cry of gulls who had long since given up following the vessel for scraps. A young man stood at the prow with his cloak pulled tight, watching a shoreline he did not recognize rise out of the morning haze. His name was Cadmus, and he had been sent from home to find his stolen sister and forbidden to return until he did. He had not seen her face in years. He would never see it again. But he did not know that yet. He knew only the deck beneath his sandals, the ache of a promise he could not keep, and the strange certainty sitting cold in his chest that the gods had already decided how this would end. Cadmus came from a family that had already learned the hard way what it meant to be noticed by the gods. His father was a king named Agenor, who ruled a wealthy coastal city far to the east, and his sister was a girl named Europa, who was by every account so beautiful that she caused problems simply by existing. This is a recurring theme in these stories. Beauty in the ancient world was rarely a blessing. More often it was a summons. One morning Europa had gone down to the shore with her handmaidens to gather flowers, the way princesses in these tales always seem to be doing right before disaster. And there, standing in the shallow surf, she found a bull. Not an ordinary bull. This one was white as sea foam, gentle as a lamb, with horns that curved like the crescent moon and a smell about it like meadows in spring. It knelt in the sand before her. It let her weave garlands around its neck, and when she climbed onto its broad back, laughing, the bull rose, walked calmly into the waves, and swam away with her over the horizon, while her handmaidens screamed helplessly from the beach. The bull, of course, was Zeus. The king of the gods had seen Europa and wanted her, and rather than simply asking, he had turned himself into livestock. This was considered romantic at the time. Back in the palace, King Agenor received the news the way any father would, with grief, then raged in a spectacularly bad decision. He called his sons together, Cadmus among them, and gave them a single command. Go and find your sister. Bring her home, and do not come back without her. Ever. If you fail, do not return at all. Sit with that for a moment. Their sister had just been carried off across the sea by a god who could become anything he pleased. The chances of finding her were essentially zero, and rather than accept that, their father had made their entire lives contingent on the impossible. Cadmus was not being sent on a rescue. He was being sent into permanent exile with an errand attached to make it feel less cruel. So he went, and he searched. He searched the coastlines and the islands. He searched the mountain villages and the river valleys. He asked shepherds and sailors and old women at wells whether they had seen a girl carried off by a white bull, and they looked at him the way you would look at a man asking directions to the moon. Years passed this way. His brothers, one by one, gave up. They settled in foreign lands, founded their own small cities, married, grew old, and quietly stopped looking. Cadmus alone kept moving, because Cadmus alone seemed to understand that he had no home left to give up on. There was nothing behind him. There was only the search, stretching on and on like a road with no end painted on it. Finding a God who does not wish to be found is a hobby with a very low success rate. Cadmus was learning this at his own expense. Eventually, worn down and out of ideas, he did what desperate Greeks always did when they had exhausted their own judgment. He went to Delphi, to the great oracle, to ask the god Apollo what he should do. Picture the place. A temple high on a mountainside, wreathed in smoke that rose from a crack in the earth, and within it a priestess who breathed those fumes and spoke in the god's own voice. Pilgrims came from every corner of the world to hear her, and they did not always like what they heard. The oracle at Delphi had a reputation for answers that were technically true and personally devastating. You went in with a simple question. You came out with a life sentence. Cadmus climbed the mountain. He made his offering, and he asked the question he had carried across half the known world. Where is my sister? How do I find her? How do I go home? The oracle did not answer any of those questions. Instead, the priestess told him something that had nothing to do with Europa at all. Stop searching, the god said. You will never find her, and you were never meant to. Leave that road behind. Instead, walk until you come upon a certain cow, a cow marked on each flank with the shape of the full moon. Follow this cow. Do not lead it, do not drive it. Simply follow wherever it chooses to wander. And on the spot where the cow finally lies down to rest, exhausted, there you will build a city. That is your true purpose, not the sister. The city. Now, imagine spending the best years of your life looking for someone, sacrificing everything, wearing your feet to nothing on foreign roads, and then walking into the holiest temple in the world to be told, essentially, forget her, go follow a cow instead. Cadmus could have been forgiven for feeling that the gods were not taking his situation seriously. But you did not argue with Delphi. You did not negotiate. You thanked the god, and you did as you were told, because the alternative was worse. So Cadmus left the mountain and began to walk. And before long, in the lands of a region called Thebes, he saw it, a cow, plain and ordinary in every way, except for the two pale moons marked upon its sides, grazing quietly among a herd that belonged to a local herdsman. Cadmus bought the animal, or perhaps simply attached himself to it, and then he began the strangest journey of his already strange life. He followed the cow. The cow wandered. Cadmus wandered behind it. It ate grass here, drank from a stream there, ambled up a hill for no reason, and down the other side for no better one. Days of this, a prince of a great royal house, once heir to wealth and standing, now trailing a cow across the countryside like the world's most patient farmhand, watching its tail flick at flies, waiting, always waiting, for the moment it would finally choose to lie down. There is something almost tender in the image, and something a little sad. The gods take a man who wanted only to save his sister and reduce him to this, a follower of livestock, a servant to an animal that does not know or care that it is leading a kingdom into being. But the cow knew where it was going, even if Cadmus did not. And at last, in a green and rolling land in the heart of Greece, in the region that would one day be called Boeotia, the cow slowed. It stopped. It sank down into the grass with a long, tired sigh, and it did not get up again. Cadmus stood over it, his heart pounding, and understood. This was the place. This was the spot the god had promised. Here on this ground he would build his city. He would name it Thebes. And every terrible thing that follows in these 6 stories, every curse, every murder, every riddle, and every ruined king begins right here, on the quiet patch of earth where a tired cow decided to rest. But before Cadmus could lay a single stone, he needed water. And to reach the nearest spring, he would have to send his men into a shaded grove nearby, a grove that was already occupied. Something lived among those trees, something old and coiled and sacred to a god who did not like visitors. Cadmus did not know it yet, but the resting place of his cow sat almost on top of the lair of a monster, and his men were about to walk straight into its mouth. I need to continue Cadmus Part 1 to hit the character floor. Then it should end on the bridge into Part 2. Let me pick up seamlessly from the final line with new story content. Expanding the same part. He decided, first, to give thanks. A city this important should begin with a sacrifice to the gods, and for a sacrifice he needed clean water for the ritual. So Cadmus turned to the men who had traveled with him, a handful of loyal companions who had followed him out of that eastern kingdom and stayed at his side through all the wandering years, and he sent them off to find the nearest spring. There was one close by, he was told. It rose cold and clear from within a grove of ancient trees just beyond the next rise. Fetch the water, he said. We will make our offering, and then we will begin. His men went, and they did not come back. What none of them knew was that the spring did not belong to them. It belonged to Ares, the god of war, and it was guarded. Coiled around the base of the trees, half hidden in the deep shade, lay an enormous serpent, a dragon, some tellings call it, a creature with scales that glittered like beaten bronze, eyes that burned a dull red, and 3 rows of teeth set in jaws wide enough to swallow a man whole. Its crest rose golden above its head. Venom dripped from its fangs and hissed where it struck the ground. This thing had lived in the grove since before anyone could remember, and it had never once been disturbed. Ares had seen to that. The men came into the shade with their water jars, thinking only of the ritual, and the serpent uncoiled to meet them. It struck before most of them understood what they were seeing. Some it crushed in its coils, folding them until their bones gave way. Some it poisoned with a single bite, the venom working so fast they were dead before they hit the earth. Some it simply tore apart. A few tried to run, and it caught them anyway, because a monster that has guarded a single spring for 1,000 years is very good at its one job. In a matter of minutes, every man Cadmus had set lay dead among the roots, and the serpent settled back down over the water it had defended. Its hunger satisfied, its territory secure, Cadmus waited. The sun climbed. Still no water, still no men, and a slow, cold understanding began to spread through him, the kind you feel in your stomach before your mind agrees to it. Something had gone wrong. He took up his spear and his sword, threw a lion's skin across his shoulders for armor, and went to see for himself. He smelled it before he saw it, the copper reek of blood, thick in the still air beneath the trees. Then he came into the grove and saw the rest. His companions, the last people on earth who had shared his exile, scattered dead across the ground. And rising above them, blood still wet on its jaws, the great serpent, turning its burning eyes toward the new arrival. A lesser man might have run. Cadmus had nothing left to run to. He had followed a cow to the ends of the earth to build a city on this spot, and he was not going to be chased off it by the local wildlife, no matter how large. So he stood his ground, and the serpent lunged. What followed was a fight that the old poets loved to describe. Cadmus hurled a great stone that would have shattered a fortress wall, and it bounced off the serpent's scales like a pebble. He drove his spear at its body, and the point turned aside. The creature reared up taller than the trees, hissing, and swung its head down at him, and Cadmus threw himself clear at the last moment. Again and again it struck, and again he dodged, backing between the trunks, waiting for the one opening he would need. The serpent, for all its size, grew angry, and angry things grow careless. It lunged too far, too fast, and pinned itself for half a heartbeat against the trunk of an ancient oak. That was the moment. Cadmus drove his spear forward with all his weight behind it, straight through the roof of the monster's mouth, and pinned its head to the tree. The serpent thrashed. The oak groaned and bent under the force of its dying. And then, slowly, the great coils went still, and the guardian of the spring of Ares lay dead at the feet of the man who had come to build a city on its doorstep. Cadmus stood there breathing hard, alone now in every possible sense, his companions dead, his monster slain, his hands shaking on the shaft of the spear. He had won, but killing a creature sacred to the god of war is not the sort of victory that goes unnoticed. Somewhere on Olympus, Ares had felt his serpent die, and Ares was not a god known for letting things go. A debt had just been created, written in the blood of the grove, and it would be Cadmus who paid it. Not today, perhaps, but eventually, and with interest. The gods keep long accounts. For now, though, Cadmus had a more immediate problem. He was one man. He had come to found a kingdom, and a kingdom needs people, soldiers, builders, farmers, families. He had none. Every companion he had brought was lying dead among the roots. He was a king of empty ground, standing over a corpse, with a moon-marked cow cooling somewhere behind him, and not a single subject to his name. And it was here, at the lowest point, that a goddess spoke to him. Athena, wise and gray-eyed, appeared beside the dead serpent, and she gave him one of the strangest instructions in all of these tales. "Do not despair," she told him. "Take the teeth of the serpent you have slain, pry them from its jaws, and plant them in the earth of your new city as a farmer plants seed." Cadmus, who by now had long since stopped questioning divine advice no matter how it sounded, knelt and did exactly that. He worked the teeth free from the monster's ruined mouth, a grim harvest, and he turned the soil of the field where his cow had lain, and he pressed the dragon's teeth down into the dirt one by one and covered them over. He did not know what he expected to grow. Wheat, perhaps. A sign. Anything what grew was an army. The ground began to move. First the tips of spears broke the surface, then helmets, then shoulders, then whole men, fully armed warriors rising up out of the earth as if the soil itself were giving birth to soldiers, row upon row of them, springing from the planted teeth of the serpent. In moments the empty field was filled with armed men blinking in the sunlight, hundreds of them, born fully grown with weapons already in their hands. Cadmus stood alone before an entire army that had not existed a minute before, and for the second time that day, he must have wondered exactly what he had gotten himself into. He was outnumbered beyond any hope of fighting them, so he did the only clever thing left to him. He picked up a stone and threw it into the middle of the crowd. The warriors, freshly born and knowing nothing of the world but the weight of the weapons they held. Each assumed the man beside him had struck the blow, and they turned on each other. The stone landed, tempers flared, and within seconds the entire army was at war with itself, brother killing brother, comrade killing comrade. The earth-born men cutting one another down in a frenzy of confusion and rage, while Cadmus watched from the edge of the field. It was slaughter, sudden and total. These men had been alive for the length of a breath, and now they were dying in heaps, killed by their own kind, over an insult no one had actually given. When it was over, when the dust settled and the shouting died, only 5 warriors remained standing, 5 out of the hundreds. They lowered their weapons, exhausted, bloodied, staring at one another and at the man who had planted them, and something in them understood that the killing was finished. These 5 would live. The Greeks called them the Spartoi, the sown men, the ones planted in the earth, and they became the first great families of Thebes, the founding nobility of the new city, the ancestral bloodline from which its future kings and warriors would descend. And there is the seed of the whole tragedy, if you know where to look for it. The noble houses of Thebes were not born of love or of gods or of anything gentle. They sprang from the teeth of a murdered serpent and were baptized in the blood of their own brothers, killing each other in the dirt before they had even learned to speak. Violence was not something that happened to Thebes later on. Violence was the soil it grew from. The city was cursed before it had walls, poisoned in its very first generation. And everything that comes after, every son who kills a father, every brother who kills a brother, is only that first field repeating itself, over and over down through the years. Cadmus surveyed his new subjects. 5 bloodied men, a dead dragon, a slain cow, and a patch of open ground in the middle of Greece. It was not much, but it was a beginning, and beginnings were all he had ever really been promised. He would build his city here. He would raise its walls with the help of these 5 earthborn lords. He would give it laws and a citadel and a name that would echo through every story the Greeks ever told. And for a time, a short and shining time, it would even seem as though he had earned a happy ending, but the serpent had been sacred to Ares. Cadmus had killed it, and the god had not forgotten, and the price for that blood had not yet been named. It was coming. It would find Cadmus not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet years afterward, when he thought the hardest part was behind him, and it would begin with a punishment and a marriage, and a curse laid so deep into the royal line that it would still be killing his descendants generations after his own bones had turned to dust. Turned to dust. The god of war does not send a bill. He sends a sentence. And when the reckoning for the dead serpent finally came, it came in a form that the ancient Greeks understood better than almost any other punishment: service. Ares demanded that Cadmus atone for slaying his sacred creature, not with gold, not with sacrifice, but with time. For the span of what the old tellings call a great year, 8 full years, Cadmus would belong to Ares. He would labor in the god's service, bound to him, working off the blood debt one day at a time like a man paying down a loan he never agreed to take. 8 years. Think about what that means for a man who had already spent the better part of his youth wandering the earth in search of a sister he was fated never to find. He had crossed the world. He had followed a cow. He had killed a monster and watched an army murder itself in a field. And his reward for founding the city the gods themselves had ordered him to build was almost a decade of servitude to the very god whose pet he'd been sent to slay. There is a grim comedy in it that the Greeks appreciated. The universe does not owe you fairness. It owes you nothing at all, and it collects on schedule dot, so Cadmus served. And the city waited, half-built, while its founder paid for the crime of building it. But here is the strange turn, the one that makes the story of Cadmus different from all the ruined kings who follow him. When the 8 years ended, when the debt was finally settled and the god was satisfied, Cadmus was not cast aside. He was rewarded. The gods, having punished him thoroughly, decided to bless him just as thoroughly, and they gave him a gift no other mortal king in Greek myth ever received. They gave him a goddess for a wife. Her name was Harmonia, and she was, by most accounts, the daughter of Ares himself and of golden Aphrodite, the goddess of love. War and desire had made a daughter together, and that daughter was given to Cadmus in marriage. It was on its surface a spectacular match, a mortal man wedding an immortal bride, the founder of a city joined to the child of 2 great gods. And the wedding that followed was unlike anything the world had seen. Picture it. For the only time in all these tales the gods themselves came down to attend a mortal wedding. They left Olympus and descended to Thebes, to the citadel Cadmus had raised, a citadel they named the Cadme in his honor, and they sat at the feast as guests. The muses sang. Apollo played. The halls of the young city filled with divine light and immortal voices, and every god brought a gift for the bride. It was the high water mark of the whole doomed dynasty. The single brightest moment Thebes would ever know, and it is worth holding on to. Because from here the light only fades, because among the gifts there was one that would poison everything. Someone, the tellings disagree on who, though the shadow of arrows and old grudges hangs over it, gave to Harmonia a necklace. And what a necklace it was! Wrought by divine hands, gleaming with gold and precious stones, fashioned in the shape of 2 serpents, whose jeweled mouths met at a clasp. It was the most beautiful ornament any mortal had ever laid eyes on. Whoever wore it would remain forever young, forever lovely, untouched by age. It was a treasure beyond price. It was also cursed. The necklace carried within its beauty a doom that would follow the royal house of Thebes down through every generation that inherited it. Every woman who wore it and every family that possessed it would be visited by catastrophe, betrayal, madness, violent death, the destruction of everything they loved. The gift looked like a blessing and worked like a slow poison, and it passed from mother to daughter, from queen to queen, threading its curse through the bloodline exactly as the necklace's own serpents wound around each other. Thebes now had two serpents at its heart. One lay dead in a grove outside the walls. The other hung glittering around the neck of its first queen, and both of them would go on killing for a very long time, but that was all in the future. For now Cadmus and Harmonia were happy. They ruled Thebes together, and the city thrived under them. Cadmus, whatever else the gods had put him through, turned out to be a genuinely great founder. The Greeks credited him with extraordinary things. They said it was Cadmus who brought the alphabet to Greece, the very letters carried from his eastern homeland, that the Greeks would use to write down every myth and history and poem they ever composed, including, in a way, this one. They said he taught the working of bronze, the mining of metals, the building of walls. He was a bringer of civilization, a king who gave his people not just a home, but the tools of knowledge itself. If the story ended here, Cadmus would be remembered as one of the great heroes of the ancient world, a man who suffered greatly and built something greater. And for years, it very nearly did feel like a happy ending. Cadmus and Harmonia had children, daughters mostly, and it is through those daughters that the curse would find its footholds. There was Semele, who would draw the eye of Zeus himself and pay for it with her life, though her son by that god would become one of the most powerful deities in all of Greece. There was Agave, whose story ends in a horror so complete that we will come to it only carefully. There was Ino and Autono, each carrying her own thread of the family doom. These were the granddaughters and daughters of a god, born into the brightest royal house in Greece, and nearly every one of them would meet an end so terrible that later poets could barely bring themselves to describe it. The necklace was doing its quiet work. The dragon's blood was calling in its debt. The soil of Thebes remembered what it was grown from. Cadmus lived long enough to see it. That is perhaps the cruelest part of his story. He did not die young and spared like some heroes. He lived on into old age, and he watched his descendants fall, one after another, to griefs he could not prevent and could not understand. He had done everything the gods asked. He had followed every instruction, paid every debt, served every sentence. And still his family was breaking apart around him, generation by generation, undone by forces set in motion on the day he first raised his spear in that shaded grove near the end of his life. Worn down by sorrow, Cadmus is said to have spoken aloud the thought that must have haunted him for years. If the gods cared so much about the death of that serpent, if a single snake was worth all of this, then perhaps he wondered the life of a serpent was worth more than the life of a king. And as he spoke the words, the story tells us, his wish was granted in the literal, merciless way the gods always granted wishes. His body began to change. Scales spread across his skin. His limbs drew in. And Cadmus, the great founder, the bringer of letters, the first king of Thebes, was transformed slowly into a serpent, coiling in the dust, his voice lost, while Harmonia wept and begged the gods to let her share his fate. They granted her wish too. She became a serpent beside him, and the two of them, king and goddess, wound their long bodies together and slipped away into the wild places of the world, leaving Thebes behind. So the man who founded his kingdom by killing a serpent ended his life by becoming one. The circle closed exactly, and that is the shape of everything that happens in Thebes. If you watch for it, the past does not stay buried. It comes back wearing the same skin. What you do in the beginning is what does you in at the end. Cadmus and Harmonia were gone, transformed and vanished. But the city remained. The walls he built still stood. The 5 earthborn lords and their descendants still ruled the noble houses. The alphabet he brought still spread across Greece, and the necklace, the beautiful, terrible necklace, wrought in the shape of twin serpents, still hung in the treasury of Thebes, waiting for the next queen, waiting for the next daughter to fasten it around her throat and inherit the doom sealed inside it. The founder had escaped, in his way, but the curse he'd married into had not left with him. It stayed behind in the stones and the bloodline, patient as the grave, and it began to move down through the generations toward a king not yet born, a king who would one day answer a riddle no one else could solve, and destroy himself in the very act of saving his people. The serpent's teeth had been sown. The harvest was not finished. It was only beginning. It was only beginning. The necklace hung in the treasury of Thebes, and the years turned over it like water over a stone. Kings rose and kings fell, and the twin golden serpents at the clasp caught the torchlight in the dark of the vault, waiting for the next hand to reach for them. This is the quiet stretch of the story, the generations between the founder and the famous king, and it is worth walking through slowly because the curse did most of its deepest work here. In the years the poets tell in a lower voice. Begin with Semele, the daughter of Cadmus. She was young and beautiful, a princess of the shining new city, and she caught the eye of Zeus, the king of the gods, exactly as her aunt Europa had done a generation before. The god came to her in secret, as gods do, and Semele grew heavy with a child that was half divine. She might have lived if she had been content with a secret lover who never showed his true face. But someone whispered doubt into her ear. The old stories say it was Hera, the jealous wife of Zeus, disguised and smiling, and the doubt did its work. Semele began to wonder whether her lover was truly a god at all, and so she asked him for a promise, and once he had sworn it, she named her wish. "Show me," she said, "show me your true self, the way you appear to Hera in the halls of heaven. Let me see you as a god." Zeus begged her to unwish it. He knew what would happen, but a god's oath cannot be broken, and so, sorrowfully, he revealed himself, not the gentle disguise, but the raw force of his divinity, the lightning and the fire that no mortal body can stand in the presence of. Semele was burned to ash in an instant, consumed by the very glory she had asked to see. She got exactly what she wanted, and it killed her, and that sentence could be carved over the gates of Thebes as the family motto. The child within her did not die, though. Zeus snatched the unborn infant from the flames and sewed him into his own thigh to finish growing. And when the time came, the boy was born a second time from the body of a god. That boy was Dionysus, the god of wine and wild ecstasy and beautiful madness. Remember him. He was born of a Theban princess in a Theban palace, and one day he would come home to the city of his mother's birth, and their homecoming would be terrible dot. So one daughter of Cadmus was burned to ash by a god. Turn now to another, Agave, her sister, and the story that later poets could barely bring themselves to tell in full. Agave had a son named Pentheus, and when Cadmus grew old and stepped down, it was Pentheus who took the throne of Thebes. He was a young king, proud and rigid, the kind of ruler who mistakes stubbornness for strength. And it was during his reign that Dionysus returned, the wine god, grown to his power now, coming back to the city where his mother had died to demand that Thebes worship him as the god he was. He came not with an army, but with something stranger and harder to fight. He came with madness. The women of Thebes, Agave among them, fell under his spell and streamed out of the city into the mountains, throwing off their old lives, dancing in the wild in the gods' frenzy. No longer entirely themselves, Pentheus was horrified. He was a king of order, of walls and laws, and here was a stranger unraveling his city from the inside, luring the women away, the king's own mother among them. He refused to accept that Dionysus was a god. He called him a fraud and a troublemaker, and he swore to stamp out the worship and drag the women home. It was the oldest mistake in these stories, a mortal setting himself against a god, certain he knows better. And Dionysus, smiling, let him make it. The god lured the young king up the mountain to spy on the frenzied women, promising him a hidden vantage point where he could watch unseen. Pentheus climbed. He hid. He watched. And then the madness the god had woven turned outward and found him. The women in their frenzy caught sight of the intruder among the trees, and their god-clouded eyes did not see a man, and certainly did not see a king. They saw a wild beast, a mountain lion crouched in the brush, come to threaten them, and they fell upon it. Agave was at the front of them, the king's own mother, deep in the god's madness, leading the pack. In their terrible strength they tore the beast apart with their bare hands, and Agave herself wrenched the head from its shoulders and lifted it high in triumph, a trophy of the hunt. She carried it back down to the city in glory, this great head she had won, and she showed it proudly to her aged father Cadmus and to all who would look. "Behold," she cried, "the lion I killed with my own hands." And slowly, as the god's madness began to drain out of her, her eyes cleared, and she looked at the thing in her hands and saw at last what it truly was. Not a lion, her son, Pentheus, the king, torn apart by his own mother because he would not bow to a god. We will move past the rest quickly, because there is a limit to how long anyone should sit with a grief that size. But understand what it means for the bloodline. The curse of Thebes was never a single monster to be slain, or a single riddle to be answered. It was this, the people you loved most becoming the instruments of your ruin, again and again, in every generation. A mother destroys her son, and she does it not out of hatred, but out of madness sent by a god who has borne her own nephew. The family is turned against itself, so completely that love itself becomes the murder weapon. That is the true shape of the curse, and it is the pattern that the most famous king of Thebes will step into without ever seeing it coming. The old poets counted the fallen of this house like a man counting bruises. Semele ash, Pentheus torn apart, Actaeon, another grandson of Cadmus, who who stumbled upon a goddess bathing in the woods and was turned into a stag and hunted down by his own hounds, devoured by the very dogs who loved him. Another loved thing turned into a killer. I know another daughter driven mad and leaping into the sea with her child in her arms. One by one, generation by generation, the descendants of the founder were harvested by grief, exactly as the earthborn warriors had been harvested in that first bloody field. The necklace hung in the treasury, the dragon's blood remembered, and the throne of Thebes passed from ruined hand to ruined hand. By now, if you were a stranger arriving in Thebes and someone told you the history of its royal house, you would think twice about accepting a crown there. The kings of this city did not tend to die peacefully in their beds, and yet the throne endured, and eventually it passed to a man named Laius, a descendant of the founding line, a king in his own right, married to a queen named Jocasta. And it is with Laius and Jocasta that the machinery of the greatest tragedy finally begins to turn, because Laius was about to do something that would set the trap for his own destruction and his sons, and the gods were about to warn him of it in words so plain that he could not possibly misunderstand. But warnings in Thebes have never once been enough. The god of Delphi was preparing to speak again, and what he was about to tell King Laius would send a newborn child out to die on a lonely mountainside and begin the most famous curse in all of Greek myth. King Laius wanted a son. This is an ordinary wish for a king, a boy to inherit the throne, to carry the bloodline forward, to keep the crown in the family. But Laius carried a shadow over him from his younger years, a wrong he had done that the gods had not forgotten. And so when he and Jocasta remained childless, he did what his ancestor Cadmus had done generations before. He sent to Delphi. He asked the oracle whether he would ever have a son. The god answered, and the answer was not a blessing. It was one of the most chilling prophecies ever spoken in the ancient world, and its horror lay in how simple and how certain it was. You will have a son, the oracle told Laius, but that son is your doom. He will grow up to kill you, his own father, with his own hands. And that is not the end of it. After he has killed you, he will marry his own mother, your wife, and from that union will come children born into a horror that will destroy your entire house. This is the fate of the son you long for. If you value your life and your kingdom, have no children at all. Sit with the weight of that. Laius went to the god asking for the happiest thing a king can hope for, and he walked out carrying a sentence of murder and worse. His own child, the one he wanted so badly, would be the instrument of his death and the ruin of everything he had. There is that pattern again, the loved thing becoming the killing thing. The same poison that ran through Semele and Pentheus and Actaeon, now reaching forward into the next generation and speaking its name out loud. Laius made a decision. He would simply refuse the prophecy. No son, no doom. He would have no children, and the whole terrible future would never come to pass. It was a reasonable plan on paper. But the gods have a way with reasonable plans, and prophecies in Greek myth have a way of fulfilling themselves precisely through the efforts made to avoid them. That is the deepest and cruelest law of these stories, and Laius was about to become its most famous victim. The struggle to escape fate is not a way out of fate. It is the road fate travels on, because in time, despite his resolve, a child was conceived. The old tellings differ on how some say a moment of weakness, some say wine, some say Jocasta simply did not know of the prophecy, and Laius could not bring himself to explain it. But the result was the same. Jocasta bore a son, and now Laius held in his kingdom the very thing the oracle had warned him against, a living infant who was fated to kill him. So Laius resolved to undo it. If the boy could not be prevented, then the boy would be destroyed. He took the newborn, his own son, only days old, and he did a thing to make certain the child could never survive even by chance. He drove a pin through the infant's tiny feet and bound them together, so the baby was crippled and marked, unable ever to crawl or walk away. And then he gave the child to a servant, a herdsman of the royal house, with a single order: take him up into the wild slopes of Mount Cithaeron, the great mountain outside the city, and leave him there. Expose him to the cold and the beasts. Let the wilderness do what a father could not bring himself to do directly. Let the boy die on the mountainside, and let the prophecy die with him. The servant took the baby and climbed. And here, in the hands of a nameless herdsman on a lonely mountain, the entire future of Thebes balanced on a single act of mercy or obedience. Because the servant looked at the infant, feet pierced and bound, wailing in the cold, and he could not do it. He could not leave a baby to die of exposure, no matter whose orders he carried. It is one of the few moments of simple human kindness in this whole grim saga, and it is exactly the kindness that dooms everyone. The servant's compassion is what allows the prophecy to come true. If he had been colder, if he had obeyed, the child would have died, and the curse would have ended right there on the mountain. Instead, he saved the boy, and in saving him, he ensured that every horror the oracle had promised would come to pass. Here is what happened. As the servant stood on the mountain, unwilling to abandon the child, but unable to bring him home, he met another herdsman, a shepherd from over the mountain, from the neighboring kingdom of Corinth, tending his flocks on the far slopes. And the Theban servant, seizing on a way to spare the infant's life without disobeying outright, handed the baby over to this stranger. Take him, he said. Take him far from here to your own country, where no one will ever know whose child he is. Let him leave, only let him live somewhere else. And the Corinthian shepherd, moved by the same pity, agreed. He took the crippled infant across the mountain and carried him home to Corinth. And there the story takes its final turn toward tragedy, because the shepherd did not raise the boy himself. He brought the child to the palace of Corinth, to the king and queen of that land, Polybus and Aristippe, who had long grieved that they had no children of their own. They took the foundling as a gift from the gods. They raised him as their own son, a prince of Corinth, heir to their throne. They named him for the wound on his body, for his pierced and swollen feet, and the name they gave him would become one of the most famous in all of human storytelling. They called him Oedipus. He grew up believing Polybus and Merope were his true mother and father. He grew up a prince, loved and honored, with no memory of the mountain and no knowledge of the pin that had marked his infant feet, no idea that he had ever been anyone but a son of Corinth. The prophecy that ruled his life was written on the walls of a temple hundreds of miles away, spoken about a family he had never heard of, and he knew nothing of it. He would grow into a strong, clever, proud young man, quick of mind and sure of himself, the pride of the Corinthian court. And every good quality he had, his courage, his intelligence, his refusal to run from hard truths, would drive him, step by careful step, straight into the exact fate his father had died trying to prevent. Because Laius was not dead yet. He was still king of Thebes, still on his throne, still believing that the infant on the mountain had solved his problem. He was wrong. His son was alive and growing, and one day the young man would set out from Corinth on a road that led toward Thebes, and toward an old man in a chariot at a lonely crossroads, who would not give way. Everything the founder had set in motion, everything the necklace and the dragon's blood had been carrying down through the generations, now had a single life to move through. The boy on the mountain had lived. The trap was set, and the most famous story in Greek myth was about to begin. Oedipus grew into the finest young man in Corinth. He was tall and strong, quick to laugh, quicker to think, and beloved by the king and queen who believed him their own flesh and blood. He had everything a young prince could want, a throne waiting for him, parents who adored him, a city that expected great things. And for a long time, that was enough. He lived without a shadow over him, which is a rare thing in these stories, and it did not last. It ended, as these things so often do, at a feast over wine on the careless tongue of a stranger. Oedipus was dining among the young men of Corinth when one of them, deep in his cups and looking for a way to wound, sneered at him across the table. "You carry yourself like a prince," the man said, "but you are no true son of Polybus. You are a foundling, a borrowed child, no blood of this house at all." The words landed and stuck. The room went quiet, the way rooms do when someone has said the unsayable. And though the man was drunk and might have meant nothing by it, the doubt was already inside Oedipus and would not come out. He went to his parents. He asked them plainly, "Am I your son, your true son, born of your own bodies?" And Polybus and Merope, who loved him and feared to lose him, reassured him and denied everything. "Of course you are ours," they told him. "Pay no mind to a drunkard's insult." But they protested a little too much and comforted a little too quickly. And Oedipus, sharp as he was, sensed something held back behind their kindness. The reassurance did not reassure him. It made the doubt worse. And so he decided to do what everyone in this family eventually does. He would go to Delphi and ask the god directly, "Am I truly the son of Polybus? Whose child am I?" He made the journey. He climbed the mountain to the temple, made his offering, and asked his question, a simple question about his parentage, nothing more. And the oracle, as the oracle always does, refused to answer the question he asked and told him instead the thing he most needed to hear and least wanted to know. The god did not tell Oedipus who his parents were. Instead, the priestess spoke the prophecy that had been spoken about him at his birth, the same words his true father had heard years before. "You are fated," the god told him, "to kill your own father, and you are fated to marry your own mother, and to father children with her, a horror against nature that will curse your house. This is what awaits you. This is who you are. Imagine standing there in the smoke of the temple, a young man who came only to learn his father's name, and receiving that. Oedipus was not weak or foolish. He was, in fact, exactly the sort of man who would do the honorable, decent, courageous thing. and that is what destroyed him, because he believed the prophecy referred to Polybus and Merope, the only mother and father he had ever known. And rather than risk harming the people he loved, he resolved never to go home again. He would not return to Corinth. He would not go anywhere near the parents he might be fated to kill and marry. He would exile himself forever to keep them safe. It was a noble decision. It was born of love, and it walked him directly into the trap, because the mother and father he was fleeing were not in Corinth at all. By running from the false ones, he ran toward the true ones. The prophecy did not need him to be wicked. It only needed him to be good and to be wrong about one thing. So Oedipus turned his back on Corinth and set out along the roads of Greece with no destination, only a direction away from the people he thought were his parents, away from the fate he thought he was escaping. And the road he chose to walk, of all the roads in all of Greece, was the road that led toward Thebes. Now leave Oedipus on the road for a moment and understand what was happening in Thebes at that same time, because the two threads were about to meet. King Laius, the true father, was still on his throne, and troubles had come to his city. He too decided to travel to Delphi to consult the oracle about the difficulties plaguing Thebes. And so at the very same time, two men were moving along the same mountain roads. A father who had tried to murder his son to escape a prophecy, and that son grown to manhood, fleeing a prophecy of his own. Neither knew the other lived. Neither would recognize the other if they met. And the gods, who had arranged all of this with terrible patience, were about to bring them together at a place where three roads crossed. The Greeks knew this place. It was a narrow spot in the mountains, a crossroads where paths met and travelers were funneled close together, with steep ground on either side and little room to pass. Oedipus, coming one way on foot, met a party coming the other, an older man riding in a chariot, with a herald walking before him and a few servants around him. The road was narrow. Someone had to give way, and here the whole weight of the curse came down on a moment as small and stupid as a quarrel over the right-of-way. The herald shouted at Oedipus to stand aside and let his master pass. Oedipus, a proud young prince unused to being ordered off the road by servants, did not move quickly enough to suit them. The old man in the chariot, impatient and arrogant in his own right, struck at Oedipus as he passed. Some say with a goad, some say he drove the horses at him. Some say he brought a staff down on the young man's head. And Oedipus, struck and insulted, his temper flaring, struck back. In the anger of the moment, in a roadside brawl over nothing, he killed them. He killed the herald, and he killed the servants who came at him, and he killed the arrogant old man in the chariot, who had raised his hand first. When it was over, the party lay dead in the narrow pass, and Oedipus, a young man defending his honor on a lonely road, walked on and thought little more of it. Travel was dangerous. Men died in quarrels. He did not know, could not have known, that the old man he had just killed was Laius, king of Thebes, his father. The prophecy's first half had just come true, and the man who fulfilled it did not even know it had happened. He had killed his father with his own hands, exactly as the god had foretold, and he walked away from the body, believing himself in exile, still fleeing that very fate. That is the horror the Greeks understood better than anyone, that you can walk straight through the middle of your doom and out the other side without ever recognizing it. that the worst thing you will ever do can feel, in the moment, like nothing at all. And the road, having taken his father from him, now carried Oedipus onward toward the city itself, toward Thebes, which lay leaderless and terrorized, its king dead in a mountain pass, and a monster crouched at its gates asking a riddle that no one could answer. Oedipus did not know it, but he was walking toward the two things that would make him a king and unmake him as a man: a throne and his mother. While Oedipus walked toward the city, with his father's blood on his hands and no knowledge of it, Thebes was suffering under a torment of its own. A monster had come to sit upon the road outside the walls, a creature the Greeks called the Sphinx. Picture the thing. It had the face and breast of a woman, the body of a great lion, and the broad wings of an eagle folded across its back, and it perched on a high rock overlooking the only road into the city. It had been set as a scourge, another of the punishments that the gods rained down on this cursed house, and it did its work with cruel elegance. The Sphinx did not simply devour travelers. It played with them first. To every man who came along the road toward Thebes, the creature posed a riddle, a single question, and it set the terms plainly. Answer correctly, and you may pass. Answer wrongly, and I will destroy you. And no one, traveler after traveler, brave man after clever man, had ever given the right answer. One by one they came, and one by one they failed, and the Sphinx tore them apart and left the road strewn with the bones of those who had guessed wrong. The city was strangled. No one could safely come in or go out. Trade withered, messengers died, and Thebes sat besieged by a single monster asking a single question that no mind in the kingdom could solve. The people were desperate. Their king was dead, murdered, they had heard, by bandits on the mountain road, though no one knew the truth of it, and now this beast held the whole city hostage. So the man ruling Thebes in the crisis, a nobleman named Creon, brother of the widowed Queen Jocasta, made a proclamation to all of Greece. Whoever could answer the riddle of the Sphinx and free the city from its terror would be given two rewards. He would be made king of Thebes, and he would be given the hand of the widowed queen, Jocasta, in marriage. The throne and the queen, to any man clever enough to save them. You can already feel the trap closing. But hold on to the moment, because it is also briefly the great triumph of Oedipus's life, the thing that makes his fall so much worse than an ordinary man's. Oedipus arrived on the road and came face to face with the Sphinx. Where braver men had trembled, he stood his ground, because if there was one thing Oedipus trusted in all the world, it was his own mind. He was clever, and he knew it, and cleverness was the whole of his identity. The Sphinx looked down at him from its rock and posed the riddle it had used to destroy so many before him. What creature, it asked, walks on 4 legs in the morning, on 2 legs at noon, and on 3 legs in the evening, and is weakest when it walks on the most? The riddle had killed everyone who heard it, and Oedipus solved it almost at once. Man, he answered. It is man. In the morning of his life as an infant, he crawls on 4 limbs. In the noon of his life, in his strength, he walks upright on 2. And in the evening of his life and old age, he leans on a staff as a 3rd leg, and is weakest of all, an old man bent over his stick at the very end. The answer was man. It was the human being in the 3 ages of a single life, and Oedipus had seen it where no one else could. The Sphinx, its riddle answered at last, was destroyed. Some say it hurled itself from the rock in fury and shame. Either way, the monster was gone, the road was free, and Oedipus had done what no one in Greece could do. He walked into Thebes, not as a wandering exile, but as a hero, the man who had saved the city, the mind that had beaten the unbeatable question. And here the terrible irony sits so heavily that the Greeks could hardly bear it. Oedipus, whose very name means swollen foot, who had been marked as an infant by the pin through his feet, answered a riddle whose solution was man walking on his feet through the stages of his life, and never once suspected that the riddle of a life told in the language of feet had anything to do with him. He solved the great question of what it means to be a human being, moving through time, and he had no idea who he himself was. He knew everything except the one thing that mattered. He could read the deepest riddle in the world and could not read his own life. The city received him as a savior, and Creon kept his promise. Oedipus, the clever stranger who had freed Thebes, was crowned its king. He took the throne that had belonged to the murdered Laius, and he was given the hand of the widowed queen in marriage, Jocasta, older than him, gracious and grieving, a woman who had lost her first husband to bandits on a mountain road, and now took a young hero as her second. Jocasta was his mother. The son who had been pierced and left on the mountain to die had come home at last, unknown and unknown, married the woman who had borne him. The second half of the prophecy, the part so monstrous that Laius had tried to murder his own infant to prevent it, had now come true in a wedding celebrated with joy by the whole city. No one knew, not the queen, not the people, not the king himself. Oedipus believed he had married a stranger, a reward for his cleverness, the beautiful widow of a dead king. Jocasta believed she had married the hero who saved her city, and the gods watched the wedding feast, and the necklace hung in the treasury, and the curse of the serpent smiled. For years, and this is perhaps the strangest part, they were happy. That is the detail the old poets return to, because it makes everything that follows so much crueler. Oedipus was a good king. He ruled Thebes wisely and well, beloved by his people, respected for the mind that had saved them. He and Jocasta lived as husband and wife, and they had children together, 2 sons and 2 daughters, born of a union that the whole natural order forbade. Children who were at once the offspring and the siblings of their own father, a tangle so unnatural that the family tree of Thebes folds back into itself and cannot be drawn straight. Among those daughters was a girl named Antigone, who would one day have a story of her own, and whose fierce loyalty would become the last great tragedy of this doomed house. But for now they were only children growing up in the palace, princes and princesses of Thebes, loved by a father who did not know he was also their brother. The city prospered. The years passed, and the whole monstrous arrangement sat quietly beneath the surface of a happy kingdom, waiting because a thing like this cannot stay hidden forever. Prophecies fulfilled do not stay silent. The gods do not arrange a horror this complete, and then simply let it lie undisturbed. Somewhere the truth was waiting to come out, and when it came, it would take everything: the throne, the marriage, the children, the queen, and the mind of the cleverest man in Greece, because a new torment was about to fall upon Thebes. A plague was coming, a sickness that would rot the crops and kill the cattle, and carry off the people, and the desperate city would once again turn to its clever king to save them. And Oedipus, who had solved every riddle ever put to him, would begin to investigate the cause of the plague. He would swear a mighty oath to find the source of the corruption and drive it out of the city, whatever it cost, whoever it turned out to be. He would hunt the truth with all the brilliance that had made him king, and the truth he was hunting was himself. The plague came quietly at first, the way plagues do, and then it came all at once. The fields of Thebes turned brown and gave no grain. The flocks in the pastures sickened and died. The women of the city bore children who did not live, and a fever moved through the streets and the houses, carrying off the young and the old alike. Smoke rose from the altars where the people burned offerings and begged the gods for mercy, and the smell of it hung over the city, thick and sweet and desperate. Thebes was dying slowly, and no one knew why. The people did what they had always done in their suffering. They turned to their king. They gathered at the steps of the palace, the old men and the young, the priests carrying branches wrapped in wool, and they cried out to Oedipus to save them, as he had saved them once before. "You solved the riddle of the Sphinx," they said. "You freed us when no other man could. Save us now. Find the cause of this plague and lift it from us. We do not ask you to be a god. We ask you to be the man who has always found the answer." And Oedipus, who loved his city and grieved for its suffering, swore that he would. He had already sent to Delphi, he told them, to ask the god what was poisoning Thebes. And when the answer came back, it was as clear as such answers ever are, and just as dangerous. The plague, the god declared, was a punishment. There was a pollution in the city, a corruption festering unpunished, and until it was rooted out, the suffering would not end. And the pollution was this: the murderer of the old King Laius was still living in Thebes, unfound and unpunished, and his crime was rotting the whole city from within. Find the killer of Laius, the god commanded. Cast him out or put him to death. Only then will the plague lift. Oedipus heard this and threw himself into the hunt with all his tremendous energy. Here at last was a riddle worthy of him, a mystery to be solved, and he attacked it the way he attacked everything, head on and without fear. He stood before the people and swore a great and terrible oath. He would find the murderer of Laius, whoever the man might be. He would spare no effort and no person. He called down curses upon the killer's head in ringing public words. Let the murderer live out his life in misery. Let him be shunned and stripped of everything. Let no one shelter him or speak to him. And then Aegypus added the words that seal the whole tragedy, the words that make the Greeks catch their breath every time. He swore this curse even if the killer should turn out to be a member of his own household, even if the murderer sat at his own table. He would show no mercy, spare no one, root out the guilt wherever it hid. He was cursing himself. He stood before his city and called down ruin upon the head of a murderer he was hunting with all his heart. And the murderer was Oedipus, and he did not know it. Every oath he swore against his own life. Every curse he pronounced would land on his own head. There is no colder moment in all of Greek myth than a man publicly and passionately vowing to destroy a criminal who is himself, and meaning every word. So the investigation began. And because Oedipus was who he was, relentless, clever, unwilling to leave any thread unpulled, it moved forward with a dreadful momentum, closer and closer to a truth that everyone around him began to sense before he did. He sent for the blind prophet Tiresias, the holy man who saw further than any sighted person in Thebes, and demanded that he name the killer. And here the story does something that it will keep doing right to the end. It offers Oedipus every chance to stop, and he refuses every one. Tiresias came, and Tiresias already knew the whole truth, and he did not want to speak it. "Let it go," the old prophet begged him. "Send me home. Do not ask me this. Some knowledge brings no good to the one who learns it. There are things it is better not to know." But Oedipus, being Oedipus, could not bear a withheld answer. He pressed, he demanded, and at last he grew angry and accused the old man of hiding the truth out of some guilt of his own. And Tiresias, stung and pushed past his patience, finally told him, "You are the killer," the prophet said. "You are the pollution poisoning this land. The man you're hunting is yourself." Oedipus did not believe him. Of course he did not. How could he? He heard the accusation not as truth, but as a plot. Surely the old prophet and Creon, his own brother-in-law, were conspiring to steal his throne with a monstrous lie. He raged at Tiresias, mocked his blindness, drove him away. The prophet left him with a warning that hung in the air, dark and riddling, that the man Oedipus sought was here, thought a foreigner but revealed a native, that he would go from seeing to blind, from rich to beggar, that he was at once the brother and father of his own children, the son and husband of his own wife. It was the whole truth, spoken plainly, and Oedipus could not hear it. It sounded like the ravings of a bitter old man. He was too certain of who he was to recognize the description of himself, but the words had gone in, even if he rejected them, and now the investigation would not let go of him. He kept pulling at threads. He questioned everyone, and slowly, piece by piece, the story began to assemble itself around him, despite his own certainty. The way a picture emerges from scattered fragments once enough of them are laid side by side. Jocasta, his wife, tried to calm him. "Do not trust prophets," she told him, meaning to comfort him. "Prophecies fail all the time. Why, an oracle once told my first husband, King Laius, that he would be killed by his own son, and it never came to pass. For the poor infant died on a mountainside, exposed with his feet pierced through. And Laius himself was killed by bandits at a place where 3 roads meet." She said it to reassure him, to prove that oracles were not to be feared. She did not notice her husband go still, because Oedipus had heard 2 things in her words that turned his blood to ice. A place where 3 roads meet, and an infant with pierced feet. He had killed a man at a crossroads where 3 roads met, and his own name meant swollen foot, and he had never known why his feet were scarred. The first cold finger of the truth had touched him, and now, having caught the smallest thread of it, this relentless man would not be able to stop pulling until the whole thing came apart in his hands and buried him. Now the questions came faster, and each answer brought Oedipus closer to the edge. He turned to Jocasta and pressed her about the murder of Laius, when it had happened, where exactly, and above all, what the old king had looked like. And she told him. Laius had been tall, she said, his hair just beginning to silver, and in build not unlike Oedipus himself. He had been killed at the meeting of 3 roads on the way to Delphi, struck down along with nearly all his servants. Only one man had survived and come home to tell of it, a single servant, a herdsman, who had fled the slaughter and returned to Thebes with the news that bandits had done it. Oedipus listened, and the ground was shifting beneath him now. He had killed a man at that very crossroads, at that very time, a proud old man with silvering hair. But he clung to one last hope, one thread that might yet save him. The survivor had said bandits, many men, and Oedipus had been alone. If the herdsman still swore that a band of robbers had killed the king, then Oedipus could not be the murderer, for one man is not many. He seized on it. "Send for the herdsman," he commanded, "the one surviving witness. Bring him here, and let him say again what he saw." On the word of a single old shepherd, everything now hung. While they waited, the story delivered one of its cruelest twists, a moment of false relief that turns to horror in the space of a breath. A messenger arrived in Thebes from Corinth, from the city where Oedipus had been raised, bringing news. Polybus, the old king, the man Oedipus believed to be his father, had died peacefully of age and illness in his own bed. And Oedipus, hearing it, felt a wave of relief so strong it was almost joy. "Do you see," he said to Jocasta, "do you see how prophecies lie? I was told I would kill my own father, and here my father has died an old man in his bed, hundreds of miles away, and I never touched him. The oracle was false. I am free of it." But the messenger, meaning only kindness, heard the fear behind the king's relief. He saw that Oedipus was still afraid of the other half of the prophecy, that he might yet return to Corinth and marry his mother, Merope. And so the messenger, wanting to set the king's heart fully at ease, told him something he thought would end all his fears. "You need not fear, Merope," he said, smiling, "for she is no true mother to you. Polybus was no true father. I know this because it was I who gave you to them. Years ago, when I was a shepherd on the mountain, I received a newborn infant and carried him to the childless king and queen of Corinth, and they raised him as their own. That infant was you." The room went cold. Oedipus, reaching now for the truth with a kind of dread, asked where the messenger had gotten the child. And the man explained he had received the baby from another herdsman, as servant of the house of Thebes, high on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, and the child's feet had been pierced and bound together. That was the very reason for the name, Swollen Foot, Oedipus. And it was here that Jocasta understood. She understood all of it at once. Before her husband did, the pierced feet, the mountain, the infant she had borne and given up to die, the young husband beside her who bore that infant's scars and that infant's name. She saw the whole monstrous shape of it in a single unbearable instant, and she begged him, with everything left in her, to stop, to ask no more questions, to leave the truth buried. For the love of the gods, she pleaded, if you care at all for your own life, inquire no further. Let it be. But Oedipus, still not seeing the full horror, thought she was ashamed only that he might prove to be of low birth, a slave's son perhaps, unworthy of a queen. He waved off her pleading. I must know who I am, he said. I will know it, however humble. And Jocasta, seeing that nothing could turn him now, cried out one last thing, a wish that he might never learn who he was, and fled from him into the palace. She did not come out again. The herdsman was brought, the old servant who had survived the killing at the crossroads, and who was, though Oedipus did not yet know it, the very same man who had once taken a pierced infant to the mountain to die and had not been able to leave him there. The two witnesses stood together now, the shepherd of Corinth and the servant of Thebes, and the truth lived in the space between them. Oedipus questioned the old herdsman, and the man, like everyone before him, did not want to speak. He knew, he had known for years, but Oedipus threatened him, demanded, would not relent, and at last, weeping, the old servant gave up the final piece. Yes, he said, the child was given to me to destroy. It was the infant of King Laius and Queen Jocasta, and there was a prophecy on it that the boy would kill his father. I was ordered to leave it on the mountain to die, and I could not do it. I pitied the baby, so I gave it to this man to carry far away to a life in another land. I thought I was saving it, and if you are that child, then the God's own words have all come true. There it was, the whole of it laid bare in the light at last. Oedipus had killed his father, Laius, at the crossroads. Oedipus had married his mother, Jocasta, and fathered children with her. Every word the oracle had spoken over his cradle had come to pass, precisely and completely, brought about by every single effort that had been made to prevent it. Laius had tried to kill him and died by his hand. Oedipus had fled Corinth to save his parents and run straight into his fate. The truth he had hunted with such brilliance was himself, and now he could no longer look away from it. He let out a cry, the old poets tell us, that was hardly a human sound, and he rushed into the palace. We will pass over the worst of what he found there gently, as this story asks us to. He went searching for Jocasta, and he found that she had taken her own life in her grief, unable to live another moment inside the horror she had understood before he did. And Oedipus, standing over her, broke entirely. He took the golden pins that fastened her robes, and with them he put out his own eyes, the eyes that had seen everything in the world except the truth closest to him, the eyes that had read the deepest riddle and been blind to his own life. If he could not bear to look upon what he had done, then he would look upon nothing ever again. The clever king, who lived by his sight and his mind, chose darkness. He who had answered the riddle of man walking through the ages of life now became the last stage of his own riddle, a broken figure who would spend his remaining years leaning on a staff and the arm of a child, groping through the dark, blind, disgraced, and shattered. Oedipus begged to be cast out of the city, to fulfill the very curse he himself had sworn against the murderer of Laius. He had kept his oath after all. He had found the killer and destroyed him. And Creon, his brother-in-law, now took up the rule of the wounded city, while Oedipus was led away, a fallen king, feeling his way into exile, guided by his daughters, the girls who were also his sisters, born of the marriage that had unmade the world. Chief among those children who did not abandon him was a daughter fierce and loyal beyond her years. She would guide her blind father through his wandering exile to its end, and she would carry the burden of this cursed family long after he was gone. The house of Thebes was not finished with its suffering. The throne would pass now to the sons of Oedipus' two brothers, and their inheritance of the family curse would set them against each other in a war that would leave them both dead by each other's hand. And when that war was over, it would fall to their sister to make one final, desperate stand at choice between the law of kings and the love she owed the dead. Her name was Antigone, and her story was about to begin. It was about to begin. Oedipus was gone. He had wandered out of Thebes a blind and broken man, led by the hand, and in time he came to rest and to die in a foreign land, far from the city he had ruled and ruined. But the curse he left behind did not go with him into the grave. It stayed in Thebes and the blood of his children, and it turned next upon his two sons, the brothers Eteocles and Polynices, born of that unnatural marriage, heirs to a throne that had destroyed everyone who ever sat upon it. The two brothers had agreed, after their father's fall, to share the kingship of Thebes between them. They would rule in turns, each taking the throne for a year and then handing it to the other, back and forth, so that neither would be denied his birthright. It was a reasonable arrangement, the kind of sensible compromise that might have worked in a family not soaked in generations of doom. But this was a house of Cadmus, where every good arrangement rots from within, and this one rotted fast. Eteocles took the throne first, and when his year was up, he refused to give it back. He liked being king. He kept the crown, and he drove his brother out of the city into exile. And just like that, the fragile peace between them shattered into war. Polynices, cast out and cheated of his turn, did what a wronged prince does. He went to a neighboring kingdom, the great city of Argos, and there he made alliances and gathered an army. He found 7 champions, 7 mighty warlords, and with them he raised a host and marched back to Thebes to take by force the throne he believed was rightfully his. The Greeks remembered this war as the assault of the 7 against Thebes, 7 great captains attacking the 7 gates of the city, 1 champion to each gate, in a siege that became one of the most famous wars in all of myth. Brother had come to make war on brother. The city that Cadmus founded was under attack by the son of its own fallen king. And the curse that began with earth-born men killing each other in a field was about to repeat itself at the very top of the bloodline. The siege was long and terrible, and we need not follow every blow of it. What matters is how it ended. After much slaughter on both sides, the 2 brothers agreed to settle the whole war between themselves, in single combat, one against the other, so that no more men need die for their quarrel. Eteocles the defender, Polynices the attacker. They met on the field before the walls, in sight of both armies, and they fought. And they killed each other. Each brother drove his weapon into the other, and both of them fell, and both of them died there in the dust, exactly as their father before them had feared, exactly as the curse had always intended. The sons of Oedipus destroyed each other with their own hands, and neither one won, and neither one ruled. And the throne they had torn the city apart over was left empty, wet with the blood of 2 brothers who could not share it. There is the pattern once more, the oldest pattern in Thebes. The people you are closest to become the instruments of your destruction. It was true of Cadmus's descendants, true of Oedipus, and now true of his sons, brothers killing brothers. Family turned into a weapon against itself, the curse folding the bloodline back onto its own throat. The 2 young men who might have ruled Thebes together lay dead before its gates, and the crown passed, once again, to the man who kept surviving these catastrophes and picking up the pieces. Creon, brother of Jocasta, uncle and great-uncle to this ruined family. Now at last the king of Thebes in his own right. And it is here, with Creon on the throne and the two brothers dead, that the final tragedy of the house of Thebes truly begins. Because Creon, taking power over a city torn apart by civil war, decided that his first act as king would be to make an example. He would show Thebes what happened to those who attacked their own city, and what happened to those who defended it, so that no one would ever again mistake treason for glory. And to do that, he made a decree about the bodies of the two dead brothers, a decree that was, in his mind, an act of justice and order, and that would turn out to be the spark that burned the last of the family to the ground. Eteocles, Creon declared, had died defending Thebes, and so he would be honored. His body would be given full and sacred burial with all the rites and mourning due to a fallen hero and king, laid to rest properly so that his soul might pass on in peace. But Polynices had marched against his own city, had brought a foreign army to burn the homes of his own people, and had died a traitor. And so Creon commanded the body of Polynices would receive no burial at all. It would be left where it fell, outside the walls, unmourned and unburied, exposed to the sun and the rain and the carrion birds and the dogs. No one was to touch it. No one was to bury it or cover it or perform any funeral rite over it. And to be certain his order was obeyed, Creon set guards to watch the corpse, and he declared that anyone caught trying to bury the traitor would be put to death. Now, to understand the horror of this to a Greek, you have to understand what burial meant to them. It was not a mere custom. It was a sacred and absolute duty, owed to the dead and demanded by the gods themselves. A body left unburied could not find rest. The soul could not pass into the underworld. To deny a person burial was to deny them peace forever, to leave them wandering, and it was among the gravest offenses against the gods that a person could commit. Creon, in forbidding the burial of Polynices, was not simply insulting a dead man. He was condemning his soul, and he was setting the law of the state directly against the law of the gods. He thought he was enforcing order. He was, without seeing it, committing an act of impiety that the gods would not forgive, and daring someone in his family to defy him. And someone did, because among the family of the dead brothers was their sister, a young woman who had already given her whole life to the duties this cursed house demanded of her, who had led her blind father through his exile and buried him at the end of the world, and who now looked at the unburied body of her brother lying outside the gates and knew, with absolute certainty, what she had to do. Her name was Antigone, and she had decided that no decree of any king on earth would keep her from burying her own brother. Antigone did not hesitate, and she did not hide her intentions even from her own sister. She went first to Ismene, the last of the 4 children of Oedipus, and told her plainly what she meant to do. "Our brother lies unburied," she said. "The king has forbidden anyone to lay him to rest, and I am going to bury him anyway, with my own hands, because he is my brother, and the dead have a claim on us that no king can overrule. Will you help me?" Ismene was frightened, and her fear was reasonable. She loved her sister, and she loved their dead brother, but she was not brave in the way Antigone was brave, and she could see clearly where this road led. "We are women," she pleaded, "and we cannot fight against the power of the throne. We have already lost everyone, our father, our mother, both our brothers in a single day. We are the last of our family. Do not throw away your life too. The king has forbidden it, and the penalty is death. Let it go, sister. I cannot do this, and I beg you not to." But Antigone had already made her choice, and nothing Ismene said could move her. "If you will not help me," she answered, "then I will do it alone." And she told her sister something that reveals the whole of who she was. She said that she would rather die for burying her brother than live for abandoning him. That the laws of the gods, unwritten and eternal, were older and higher than any decree a mortal king might publish for a day. That her deepest loyalty was not to the state, but to her blood and to the dead and to the gods, who demanded that the dead be honored. If obeying the king meant leaving her brother's soul to wander forever unburied, then she would disobey the king, and she would accept whatever came of it. She was not afraid to die. She had watched her whole family destroyed. Death held no terror for her that the world had not already taught her to bear Dot, so she went out to the body of Polynices alone, and she did what she had come to do. She could not give him a full and proper burial, not under the eyes of the guards, but she did what the sacred rites required at their most basic. She scattered dry earth over his body, a symbolic burial, enough to satisfy the gods and grant his soul its passage. She performed the mourning rites, and the guards who had let their watch slip discovered the body covered and cried out, and when they cleared it and watched again, they caught her returning to tend it once more. They seized her and dragged her before the king, and here the story becomes, at its heart, a collision between two people who are each, in their own way, certain they are right. Creon confronted Antigone and demanded to know whether she had defied his decree, knowing the penalty. And she did not deny it for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I did it. I knew your law, and I broke it, and I would break it again." She stood before the king of Thebes, a young woman with no army and no power, the last daughter of a doomed house, and she told him to his face that his decree meant nothing against the eternal laws of the gods, that a mortal king had no right to keep a sister from burying her brother, and that she was not ashamed of what she had done, but proud of it. She would rather die honoring the dead than live obeying a cruel and impious command. Creon was enraged, and he was also, in a way, trapped by his own nature, exactly as everyone in this family is trapped by theirs. He was a new king who had staked his authority on this decree. To back down now, to be defied publicly by a young woman and let it stand, would be to show weakness before the whole city. He could not bear it. His pride and his fear of looking weak hardened him just as Oedipus's certainty had once hardened him, just as Laius's fear had driven him to the mountain. And so Creon condemned Antigone to death. He would not spill her blood outright, but he ordered her sealed alive inside a tomb, a cave in the rock, walled up with a little food, and left there to die in the dark. He would let the gods take her if they wished, and keep his own hands technically clean, and be rid of the defiant girl who had challenged his rule. Everyone around him could see that he was making a terrible mistake. His own son, a young man named Haemon, came to plead with him, and here the curse tightens one more turn because Haemon was betrothed to Antigone, promised to marry the very girl his father had just sentenced to be buried alive. Haman begged his father to relent. "Father," he said, "the whole city grieves for this girl in secret. They believe she did a noble thing. They think she deserves honor, not a tomb. Do not be so certain that you alone are right. A wise man knows when to bend. Listen to the people, listen to reason, and let her go." But Creon, deaf in exactly the way this family is always deaf, heard only defiance in his son's plea, and accused the young man of taking a woman's side against his own father, and refused. The two of them parted in anger, and Haman left. And Creon did not understand what he had just set in motion. Then came the blind prophet Tiresias one final time, the same holy man who had once tried to warn Oedipus, still seeing what the powerful could not. He came to Creon and told him he had gone terribly wrong. "You have kept a dead man from his grave," the prophet said, "and you have condemned a living woman to a tomb, and in doing both you have offended the gods. The altars of the city are fouled. Disaster is coming to your own house unless you undo what you have done. Bury the dead brother. Free the living girl. Do it now before it is too late." And Creon at last was afraid. The warnings of Tiresias had never once been wrong, and even a proud king could feel the ground shifting. He relented. He rushed to undo his own decree, first to bury the body of Polynices properly, and then to hurry to the tomb and free Antigone before the darkness claimed her. But this family is never granted a rescue that arrives in time. That is one of its oldest and cruelest rules. The mercy of the servant on the mountain came too late to save anyone. And Creon's change of heart came too late as well. When they broke open the tomb, Antigone was already dead. She had not waited in the dark for death to come slowly. She had taken her own life inside the cave rather than perish by inches at a tyrant's whim, the last free choice of a young woman who had refused every command that violated her conscience. And there, in the tomb beside her body, they found Haman, Creon's own son, who had gone to her and who now, in his grief and his fury at his father, took his own life over the body of the girl he had loved. Creon reached for his son, and his son turned on him with a look of hatred, and then was gone, dead by his own hand, all in an instant, in the dark of the tomb his father's pride had made. And the ruin did not stop there. When the news reached the palace that Haman was dead, that the king's cruelty had killed his own son, Creon's wife, the boy's mother, heard it, and she too could not bear to live. She took her own life within the palace walls, cursing her husband with her final breath for the death of their child. And so Creon, who had begun by wanting only to enforce order and make an example, ended the day having lost everything, his niece dead in a tomb, his son dead beside her, his wife dead in the palace, his family destroyed as utterly as the family he had condemned. He had thought he was the one man strong enough to rule this cursed city, the survivor who would restore order at last. And the curse had simply waited and let him make his choices, and taken everything from him too. He was left alive. That was his punishment, to live. To be a king with no family, alone in a palace full of the dead, having caused every death himself through nothing but his own rigid pride. The house of Cadmus was empty now. Antigone, the last fierce spirit of the line of Oedipus, was gone, and with her the direct blood of the founder ran out at last into silence. Every one of them had been warned. Laius was warned, and Oedipus was warned, and Creon was warned plainly by prophets and by those who loved them. And every single one of them, driven by fear or pride or certainty, had done the very thing that destroyed them. Which raises the last question this whole long saga leaves us with, a question the Greeks turned over for centuries and never fully answered. If they were all warned and all destroyed anyway, then was any of it ever truly their choice at all? Truly their choice at all? The Greeks had a word for it. They called it moira, fate, the portion, the share of the world that is allotted to each person before they draw their first breath and cannot be given back or traded away. It was not quite the same as our idea of destiny, and it was stranger and older than the will of any single god. Even the gods, in the deepest Greek imagination, were bound by it. Zeus himself, the king of heaven, could delay fate, could grieve over it, could rage against it, but could not finally undo it. There were three ancient sisters who spun the thread of every mortal life, one who drew the thread out, one who measured its length, and one who cut it. And when the thread was cut, it was cut, and no power in the world or above it could tie it back together. Every king in the story of Thebes lived and died inside the length of thread the sisters had measured for him. And so, in a way, do we all. This is the idea that the tragedy of Thebes was built to explore, turned over and over across 6 generations, and it is worth sitting with quietly now, at the end, in the calm that comes after the storm of all that grief, because the whole saga is really one long meditation on a single unbearable question. How much of what happens to us is our own doing, and how much was written before we ever began? The Greeks did not answer it cleanly, because there is no clean answer. Instead, they built a story that holds both possibilities at once, and lets you feel the terrible weight of each. Look back over the whole line, from the founder to the last daughter, and watch the shape of it. Cadmus was told to stop searching and follow a cow, and he did, and he built a city, and the city was cursed. Laius was told his son would kill him, and he tried to murder the child to prevent it, and the very act of trying is what set the prophecy in motion. Oedipus was told he would kill his father and marry his mother, and he fled his home to protect the people he loved. And by fleeing he ran straight into the arms of the fate he was fleeing. Antigone chose to bury her brother, knowing it would kill her. Creon chose to forbid the burial, and the choice destroyed his family. Every one of them acted. Every one of them chose. And every one of those choices led exactly where the prophecy said it would. As if the choosing itself were part of the design, as if free will and fate were not opposites at all, but the same thing seen from 2 different sides. That is the deep and quiet horror at the center of these old stories, and also, strangely, their comfort. Because notice what fate does and does not do in the tale of Thebes. It does not reach down and move people like game pieces against their will. No god seizes Oedipus's hand and forces him to strike Laius at the crossroads. No divine power compels Antigone to defy the king. They are not puppets. They act freely out of who they are. Oedipus out of his relentless honesty and his refusal to leave a riddle unsolved. Antigone out of her fierce love and her loyalty to the dead. Laius out of his fear, Creon out of his pride. Their fates come to pass not despite their characters, but through them. The prophecy does not override who they are. It works through exactly who they are. And that is why the Greeks found the idea so haunting, because it suggests that the deepest kind of fate is simply the unfolding of a person's own nature all the way to its end. You are fated to be yourself, and being yourself fully and without escape is what carries you to the place that was always waiting. There is a strange kind of dignity in this, buried underneath all the sorrow. The kings and daughters of Thebes are not diminished by their fates. They are, in a way, made larger by them. Oedipus, blind and broken and exiled, is not a small figure at the end of his story. He is enormous, a man who faced the very worst that could be faced, who did not look away, who accepted the full weight of a truth that would have crushed anyone. Antigone, sealed in her tomb, is not defeated. She is triumphant in the only way that mattered to her, having stayed true to the deepest law she knew right up to the moment of her death. The Greeks did not tell these stories to make their audience feel small before an uncaring universe. They told them to show what a human being looks like when tested past all endurance, and to say quietly that there is a greatness in meeting your fate with your eyes open, whatever that fate turns out to be. And they told them, too, as a warning to the powerful, which is why the story keeps returning to kings. Watch how the tragedy falls again and again on those who sat highest. Laius the king, Oedipus the king, the two royal brothers, Creon the king. The crown of Thebes is not a prize in these stories. It is a target to be raised up above other people. To hold power over a city is to be exposed, to be watched by the gods, to have the longest possible way to fall. The Greeks distrusted the pride that comes with great power. They had a word for that, too. Hubris, the arrogance that makes a mortal forget his limits and imagine himself beyond the reach of the gods. And every king in Thebes, in his own way, forgot his limits. Laius thought he could outsmart a prophecy. Oedipus thought his cleverness made him master of his own fate. Creon thought his decree could stand above the law of the gods themselves. And fate, patient as always, let each of them believe it, right up until the moment it took everything away. So the throne of Thebes teaches the same lesson over and over to anyone who would sit on it or on any throne. You are not as free as your power makes you feel. You are not above the order of things. The higher you climb, the more the gods take notice, and the harder the ground when you come down. It is a lesson kings have always needed and almost never learned. And the Greeks knew that and told the story anyway, generation after generation, hoping perhaps that someone, someday, would listen before the thread was cut. But mostly the story is not about kings at all. Mostly, in the quiet of the night, it is about all of us, because none of us are pharaohs or founders, and yet every one of us lives inside a fate we did not choose, the family we were born into, the time and place we arrived in, the nature we were given before we had any say in the matter. We all spend our lives making choices, and we all carry the strange suspicion in our quieter moments that those choices were somehow always going to be the choices we made, that we are only ever becoming more fully the person we already were. The House of Thebes simply lived this truth at the highest possible volume, with crowns and prophecies and monsters, so that we could see clearly, in the bright hard light of myth, the thing that runs quietly underneath every ordinary life. And there is a mercy in that, if you look for it. The people of Thebes were not punished for being wicked. They were for the most part no worse than anyone else. Cadmus was faithful, Oedipus was honest, Antigone was loyal, and even Laius and Creon were only afraid and proud, as most of us are afraid and proud. They suffered not because they deserved it, but because they were caught in something vast and old, a pattern set in motion long before they were born, and they did the best they could inside it. That is not a comforting thought exactly, but it is a gentle one. It asks us to look on the ruined kings of Thebes, not with judgment, but with a kind of tenderness, the way you might look on anyone doing their best inside a life they did not design, and to extend perhaps that same tenderness to ourselves. The city of Thebes still stands in Greece, or what remains of it does, a modern town built over the ancient ground, where children play and people go about their days above the buried stones of the citadel that Cadmus raised. The dragon's teeth are long gone. The necklace has vanished into legend. The kings are dust, and the daughters are dust, and the whole doomed bloodline of the house of Cadmus has run out entirely into silence, as all bloodlines eventually do. What remains is the story, and the story remains because it tells the truth about something we have never stopped needing to understand, the strange, unbreakable, and finally quite beautiful bond between who we are, what we choose, and where we were always going to end up. The three sisters are still spinning. The old poets would say, they spin the thread of every life that has ever been lived and every life still to come. They drew out the thread of Cadmus and measured it and cut it. They did the same for Oedipus and for Antigone, and they will do the same, in time, for each of us. And there is no fighting the sisters, and no bargaining with them, and no need, in the end, to try. The thread is as long as it is. The only thing ever left to us is how we choose to walk its length, with fear, or with pride, or, if we are very wise, with our eyes open and something like peace, following the quiet path laid down for us, all the way to the place where the thread runs gently out, and the light goes soft, and the long story finally comes to rest. Story finally comes to rest. There is one more way to look at the whole long story, softer than the rest, and it is the way the old storytellers themselves seemed to prefer when the tale was done, and the fire had burned low. They did not send their listeners home with despair. That was never the point of a tragedy. The Greeks believed that watching a great fall from a safe distance in the warm dark of the theater did something good to a person. It emptied them out. It moved something deep in the chest that needed moving, some weight of fear and pity that all of us carry and rarely have any way to set down. They had a word for that, too, a cleansing, a washing through, the strange relief that comes from feeling grief that is not quite your own and letting it wash back out again. You did not leave the story of Thebes crushed. You left it lighter, somehow, having wept for kings who were not you, and finding your own life, by comparison, gentler than you had remembered. So let the last thought of this long night be a kind one, drawn from the wreckage of that ancient house. Consider how much love there was in it, underneath all the doom. It is easy telling the story quickly to see only the horror, the murders, the plagues, the tombs. But look closer, and the whole tragedy is driven, from beginning to end, by love. Cadmus wandered the earth out of love for a lost sister. Laius did his terrible thing out of a twisted love of his own life and throne. Oedipus fled his home out of love for the parents he believed were his. Antigone went to her death out of love for a dead brother. Even Creon's ruin came from a kind of love, badly expressed, for the order and safety of his city. These were not cold people. They were people who loved fiercely in a world that seemed designed to turn their love into the very thing that destroyed them. And there is something almost unbearably human in that the deepest griefs of this family were never born from hatred, but always from caring too much. The Greeks understood that love and fate are tangled together in ways we can never fully pull apart. To love anything at all is to hand a piece of your fate to something outside your control. To love a person is to become vulnerable to everything that might happen to them. The house of Thebes loved and suffered for it, exactly as everyone who has ever loved anything has suffered for it in smaller ways. And yet not one of them, given the chance, would likely have chosen to love less. Antigone would not trade her loyalty to her brother for a longer, safer life. Oedipus would not unlove the city he tried so hard to save. The love was worth the fate, even when the fate was terrible. Perhaps especially then, and maybe that is the quiet wisdom the old poets buried at the bottom of all this sorrow, for us to find on a night like this one. That a life is not measured by whether it escapes its fate, because none of them do and none of us will. A life is measured by how much it loved along the way, and how honestly it faced the truth when the truth finally came, and whether, at the end, it could meet the cutting of the thread with something other than terror. The kings of Thebes teach us that we cannot outrun what is coming, but they teach us, too, that there are worse things than an ending. There is the refusal to love because love might hurt. There is the refusal to see because the truth might wound. There is the pride that will not bend and so is broken instead. The tragedy is not that the thread is cut. The tragedy is only ever in how we lived before the cutting, and that part, the poets insist, remains ours. Fate decides the length. We decide in some small and stubborn and human way the shape dot, so the citadel is dust, and the crowns are dust, and the three sisters go on spinning in the dark beyond the reach of gods and kings alike. The story of Thebes has ended, as all stories end, as all lives end, folded quietly back into the great silence out of which they came. But it does not feel like a cruel silence tonight. It feels more like rest, like a long day finally over, like the fires burning low in a village square, the last voices gone soft, the work all done, and nothing left to do but let the warmth of the embers settle over you and carry you down. The kings of Thebes have lain down at last. Cadmus, who followed a cow to the ends of the earth and became a serpent in the dust. Oedipus, who answered every riddle but his own and found peace only in the dark. Antigone, fierce and loyal to the very end, resting now beside the brother she would not abandon. All of them quiet now. All of them finished with their long and difficult portions. Their threads run gently out, their griefs and their glories both laid down together in the same soft ground. Whatever the gods intended, whatever fate decreed, it is over for them now, and there is a mercy even in that. The struggle is done. The prophecy is fulfilled. There is nothing left to fear, and nothing left to fight, and nothing left to do but sleep. And so, at the end of it all, the great and terrible house of Thebes comes finally to its rest, the way all things come to rest, the way the light fades from a room when the last candle gutters low, the way an old story closes its final page and asks nothing more of anyone. The sisters spin on. The thread runs out, and in the quiet dark that follows, there is only the soft and steady peace of an ending that was always from the very first breath, exactly where it was always meant to go. The philosophers who came after the poets argued about all of this for centuries, sitting in their schools in Athens and elsewhere, turning the old stories over the way you might turn a stone in your hand to catch the light on every side. Some of them said the tragedies proved that the universe was ordered, that there was a justice running underneath everything, hard to see but real, and that even the sufferings of Thebes fit into some larger pattern that made sense from far enough away. Others said the opposite, that the stories showed a world without justice at all, where good people were destroyed for no reason, and the only honest response was to face that emptiness with courage and dignity and refuse to pretend it was otherwise. And still others said that the point was never to solve the question, but to live well inside the not knowing, to accept that some things are beyond our understanding, and to be at peace with the mystery rather than tormented by it. They never agreed. They are still, in a sense, arguing now in every classroom where these stories are read. But they all kept reading them, which tells you something. A story you cannot stop returning to is a story that has hold of a real truth. Even if no one can ever quite say what it is, and ordinary people, who never sat in any school, understood the stories in their own way, which was perhaps the wisest way of all. They did not need a philosophy of fate. They needed only to recognize, in the fall of Oedipus, the shape of their own smaller sorrows, the ways their own best intentions had sometimes gone wrong, the ways they too had been shaped by families they did not choose and times they could not control, the ways love had cost them, and truth had wounded them, and pride had tripped them up. They saw themselves in the mirror of the myth, made larger and clearer, and seeing themselves there, they understood themselves a little better. That is what these stories were always for, not to explain fate, but to help us live with it, not to answer the great question, but to keep us company inside it. And on a quiet night, thousands of years later, in a world the Greeks could never have imagined, the story still does exactly that. It keeps us company in the dark, and reminds us gently that we are not the first to wonder about these things, and we will not be the last, and there is an old and steady comfort in that long, unbroken line of wondering for every person who has ever lain awake turning over the same questions has been, in that moment, a member of the same quiet company, the company of all who have looked up at the same indifferent stars and felt both very small and strangely held, both fated and free, both mortal and, for the length of a single breath, part of something that does not end. The kings of Thebes belonged to that company. So did the poets who sang of them, and the philosophers who argued over them, and every listener down all the centuries who ever sat in the dark and let the old story wash over them and carry them, at last, toward sleep. And so do you tonight. One more soul in that long, gentle line, one more thread among the countless threads spun and measured, and in time softly cut, but not yet, not tonight. Tonight the thread runs on. Tonight there is only rest. So let the house of Thebes lie down, and let its kings lie down, and let their long story fold quietly closed. The fires are embers now, the voices have gone still, the work of all those lives is finished, and the ground has taken them gently back, and whatever fate intended for them has been fully and completely done. There is nothing more to fear. There is nothing more to fight. There is only the deep and steady quiet that comes at the end of every story ever told, and the soft dark settling over everything like a blanket drawn up in the night, and the long slow breathing of a world at rest, and the thread running gently out, exactly where it was always from the very first meant to go, the very first meant to go.